ACCA, the world's most forward-thinking professional accountancy body.
Hello, I'm Neil Johnson, the ACCA Careers Editor, and welcome to this episode of the Careerwise podcast, where we're joined by a couple of experts to talk all things CV related, including do's and don'ts, putting yourself in the reader's shoes, and if it's ever okay to allow a spelling mistake to slip through. So open your CV, get your notepad ready, and enjoy. I'm joined by HR expert Caroline Bixby and CV guru Neville Rose. With no further ado, Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Neil. My name's Caroline Bixby. I'm Group HR Director for a company called Christie Group. We have about 40 offices over the UK and Europe, and we are predominantly about buying and selling businesses. In my previous role, I was actually looking after accountants. It was a practice. So I had 47 trainees, all coming in from school or university at various stages of their careers. And now I have 30 people in the finance team who are various stages of their AAT, ACCA journey.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And over to you, Neville.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, so my name's Neville and I'm a professional CV writer. I'm the owner and director of CV Writers. And so I help clients from every walk of life, from graduate through to chief executive officer. I help to write their CVs and their LinkedIn profiles. And I'm also a qualified career counsellor as well. So I help people to kind of define and make decisions about the right next steps for their career.
I like having both of you here because you're getting both sides of the coin, so to speak. You're getting somebody who writes CVs for a living, someone who reviews CVs for a living. So I think between the two of you, there's a lot to say about this topic. And I want to kick off with, as a little warm-up, what's the strangest or funniest thing you've ever seen in a CV?
Well, as part of my role, we offer a CV review. So we get lots and lots of people sending in their CVs for a review, which is essentially a 10-minute kind of quick appraisal of a CV. So as you can imagine, I see all kinds of CVs. It's actually difficult. The state of some CVs is so appalling, it's quite unbelievable. But I guess the one thing that really springs to mind in terms of something quite memorable was I recall one person sending over a CV and they were a proofreader and they had spelt proofreader incorrectly in the heading of their CV. And I just thought, well, this just about sums up, how could anyone in that kind of capacity make such a mistake? But it happens, and it happens all the time. And so it never ceases to amaze me, the strange and wonderful things that people write in their CVs.
I wonder if that was me, because I was a proofreader in a former life. I'm not one anymore. Over to you, Caroline. Have you seen any wild and funny things?
See, I'm actually quite an advocate of being a little bit different because, to stand out, etc. I understand that. But I think the most difficult to read has been from a creative point of view, where somebody has put so many images and creative colours on the page that I couldn't actually read the text. So they may have amazing CV, but I just couldn't read it. So on that basis, it was a no from me.
Yeah, and that leads us perfectly into one of the bulky themes of this podcast is the CV do's and don'ts. I'd imagine, Caroline, that's a don't.
Yeah. Unless somebody really wants a creative, but they need to be able to read the actual text.
That makes complete sense. I wanted to start maybe on a positive note. Let's start with the do's. If you want to kick things off, Neville, what is perhaps your top 2 or 3 do's that people should definitely do in a CV?
All right. Well, number one, I think would be to include achievements. One of the biggest mistakes that job seekers make is to write simply a list of duties. And quite often, applicants will simply copy and paste a job description into their CV. So what you end up with is a very generic looking CV that tells you absolutely nothing about that person. Sometimes it's even written in third person. Every employment that you have needs to tell its own story. And the best way of telling that story is by giving the reader examples of things that you've achieved. And if you can quantify those achievements, then so much the better, because most things are about improving businesses or services in some way, and there will usually be some kind of metric that can be included to demonstrate the improvement that you've made. So showing you performing well, I think, is one of the most important things that you must show in your CV.
Makes sense.
Another do, which I feel is very important, is to tailor the CV for the different jobs that you apply for. Again, a common mistake is to use one generic CV use the scattergun approach, send that out to hundreds of different applications, and then become really frustrated by not receiving any responses to that. And can't often speak to me and say, I can't believe I've applied for so many jobs and I know that I'm right for that post, and I've never hear anything back. And the first thing that I ask is, well, are you tailoring the CV? And the answer to that is usually no. So I think tailoring the CV is a really, really important thing to do, even for roles with the same job title, because the criteria could be very different for each employer. And so you've got to read carefully the job description and, most importantly, the person specification, and try to match as closely as you can. And no one's ever going to be 100% match, but to try to match it as closely as you can to the person specification. And that's going to really make a difference, I think, in the success of your job applications.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think it's that quality over quantity attitude to take when applying for jobs in general, as instead of sending out as many CVs as possible, choose some jobs carefully, read the job description carefully, tailor your CV to each one. On to you, Caroline. What 2 to 3 top do's that you like to see?
I mean, I'd echo everything that Neville's just said, but that's a bugbear of mine, that third person. If I put Caroline was an excellent leader, that's my opinion, isn't it? So how am I going to prove that I'm an excellent leader? What is it I can show that I did to make sure that actually I was giving facts rather than my opinion? The other thing is, I would actually say, if you were looking at a CV yourself and putting the listeners into our positions, and you had a sports team and say you played football, what would you be looking for if somebody came to you and said, can I join your club? So you'd be looking, actually, do they have any competency in football? Do they understand the rules? Do they know where you play? Do they know what the game consists of in terms of the two halves? When you're looking at a role, it's exactly the same. So if I enjoy books, then I'll be saying I enjoy crime writing. So if I'm going to choose somebody to come into my book club, what is the selection criteria for them? And that's kind of your CVs. It's a personal insight into your skills. That's what it is. You're trying to tell a story about why you're matching that role, and try and use the language that you use. Don't use your parents' language or your cousin's language. Use your language. The caveat to that is, obviously, don't use text talk. If you're going for an accountancy role, think about what they're looking for, but don't overthink it. Don't try and re-engineer it as such, because they understand where you're coming from. They understand that you don't have any experience. They understand that actually you're making transition, and that's okay.
Yeah. Tell your own story to a degree and do it in as much as possible in your own words. But like you said, do not do text speak and include emojis. Is it worth as well putting yourself in the shoes of the recruiter or of the person reading your CV? When you're thinking about writing a CV or thinking of the skills you want to talk about, the experiences, you want to look at the job description quite closely. Is that correct?
It's aligning, isn't it? But also being really honest about, you've got an interest, but you don't have the skills. There's a myth, again, for accountancy. It's all about the numbers and you need to be a maths whiz. You don't. You need to have common sense. You need to have other skills, prioritising and being able to make decisions and all the things that you have which are transferable skills. So don't forget those transferable skills. That's not relevant because it's not about finance. It is relevant because actually you're going to be doing lots of different things with people. It's a people organisation that you're going to go into. You're going to have to talk to other people. So if you've got examples, put them on a CV. Within reason, don't have to go into lots of detail, but it's about actually showing that you've had to do things on your own merits. And another thing I would say is, say I, not we. Own what you did do and what you've achieved. Again, going from what Neville said. Don't feel afraid to actually say, I did this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that.
There's a built-in presumption from the reader that nothing is done in isolation, and therefore it's fine to write that I did this, so long as you can, hand on heart, you played a key role in doing something. Well, yes, if the words that you use can describe your particular role in that. And a point you just made a minute ago, Neil, about putting yourself in the shoes of the reader. One of the things that I often see in CVs is a presumption of knowledge. A lot of people write the CV from their own perspective and are not thinking through, well, what will the recruiter know and what won't they know? You're imagining the recruiter has been in that organization with you for the last 5 years. You might name a project without actually telling the reader and describing what that particular project is. So whenever you write anything in a CV, what will the reader understand and what won't they understand? And to write things in simple and clear and plain English, trying to imagine yourself as that recruiter, that window looking into your CV.
No acronyms. and no abbreviations. When you've got a passage which is all 3-letter words, you're thinking, I have no clue what any of that means. And it may be really obvious to you, but isn't to the actual reader, going from what Neville said. It's not obvious because you're not in that environment. So just take some time to actually explain or simplify it.
That's so true. Acronyms are kind of lazy. It's a presumption of knowledge. This is your first impression, your first communication, usually, that you have with an employer. You're going to make it difficult for the reader to interpret and understand what it is that you're talking about.
Yeah, you might end up isolating the reader. Caroline, you might put a comment on this. We hear there's stories about recruiters, HR people going through hundreds of CVs a day. The last thing you want to be doing is Googling an acronym.
100%. Literally last week, I had a role that I had 150 applications for. So there was me on my sofa every evening going through all of the applications, and I read every single one of them and I responded to every single one of them. But you want to be able to give your best, and where I can, give feedback.
Your job's made easier by finding the right CV and the right
Yes.
person. This is where the CV should be given time and respect and taken very seriously. I just wanted to go back a little bit about the key words, and there's another reason, Neville, why matching up the keywords to the job description in your CV works, because also there might be that your CV passes through an applicant tracker system, or AI robots might crawl over it, and this is what they look for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So nowadays we have effectively two audiences for the CV. Firstly, you have applicant tracking systems, which are basically an automated filtering system where they look at keywords, phrases, and the information that you provided. They could be qualifications too. An ATS system will then come up with a short list of candidates for a recruiter, including keywords or phrases that are aligned to a particular job description and person specification is highly important for getting through that initial filter. And it's estimated that about 70% of CVs fall foul of ATS filters. So a lot of people are getting that part of it wrong. You've then got the human reader. Of course, ultimately it is going to be a recruiter who's going to be making a decision on calling you to interview. And again, including the right keywords or phrases there is important to show that you're aligned with that organization and that you show an affinity to it. And of course, those key words or key phrases could describe various kind of activities that you may be involved in. So yeah, those keywords or phrases are important for both ATS systems and for the recruiter.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. We've covered all the do's, I think, and I think within the do's, a lot of obvious don'ts are there. Is there anything that, like a pet peeve, when you see a CV, you're just like, oh no, are there some don'ts which really stand out and put the CV in the bin?
Yeah, I think for me, it's when I can't follow it. So what happens sometimes is people put all their experience in one block and then they literally put the timeline underneath. And I don't understand which of the experiences relate to the actual roles. So if it's really difficult to follow, or it takes real brain power and I have 150 CVs, no matter how much I want to will that person, I've got a certain amount of time, and unfortunately that is life. There was a debate on LinkedIn with a recruiter and a potential applicant. They said on average they spend 10 to 15 seconds on reviewing a CV. There was a real backlash on that individual. But hang on a minute, I'm a recruiter, I'm a professional recruiter, this is what I do every day, and I have a portfolio of clients that I need to service. So actually I need to be able to glance through that CV so I can then put them on my maybe or my yes pile, or whatever that looks like for them. So again, if it's not easy to read, it makes that recruiter's job so much more difficult.
I think a few years back, perhaps applicants became confused by the idea that you want to try and get all the most important information on the front page, but that was done at the sake of losing the structure of the CV. Because there's no point in having a list of achievements at the beginning of the CV if they're not referenced to particular jobs. You've already lost the engagement and the interest of the reader if they don't understand what that information relates to. So having, clearly labeled headings that the recruiter can understand, that they can navigate their way around the CV quickly and easily to find the information that is important to them, that they can absorb that information easily. So for example, simple things like using bullet points. Don't have long paragraphs. The recruiter's not going to read all of that information. Use as few words as possible to make your points. And you can often make points more powerfully by actually using less words rather than more. So simple devices like this to break up information, make sure that the CV is easy to navigate, because as Caroline said, seconds rather than minutes are going to be spent reading a CV. So again, comes back to that point about putting yourself in the shoes of the reader and understanding how recruiters read CVs, and it really is not going to be a very long time at all.
Clearly, I spent a lot longer than 10 seconds reading the CVs, just putting it out there.
But I was just counting in my head. I was like, 1, 2. I thought, if you know what you're looking at, it works, and if your CV is well written and clearly laid out.
The other thing I'd say is stay away from ChatGPT to create your CV. It will do it in a stock thing, and trust me, Neville and myself can spot it from about 10 miles away that you've done ChatGPT. Any of your correspondence that you do in ChatGPT, we know, trust us.
This leads on to a bit of a myth busting or a myth confirming section. You talked about brevity, clarity, having something that's very well laid out. Also leads me to, how long should it be? Is there an industry standard, and is there a max? Is there a minimum? Neville?
I guess on the understanding that, particularly on first sift, seconds rather than minutes are going to be spent reading a CV. So again, if we understand the behavior of the reader when they initially look at that CV, you've got a very, very short window of opportunity, and therefore you need to get your message over quickly. So there is no point in having reams and reams of information. It's much better to keep it short. So that's not to say it has to be 2 pages, but quite often what I find is for people with experience in a particular job, a 1-pager might just limit the amount of information that you can include, particularly if you want to provide concrete examples of achievements. So a 1-page CV might work well for a graduate or for an early starter, but for the majority of job seekers, a 2-page is ideal. When people get further along in their career, perhaps with 20 or 30 years, quite often people tend to add on their CV without editing it down. So they do end up with 5 or 6 pages and lots of information on their early jobs, and less information because people become less enthusiastic, shall we say, about updating their CV as they get older. And so you have less information on the most recent stuff and lots of information on the early stuff. So that's a big no-no as well. So keeping it to 2 pages is more important, I think, as you go on in your career, because you want to keep it contemporary, you want to keep it up to date. And generally, of course, the last 5 or 6 years are going to be most representative of the kind of seniority and the level and probably the kind of job that you want to apply for next. So in general, a 2-page CV format, I think, works well. It's a good framework that works for most people, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Talking about brevity, perhaps especially if you're a junior, you're going to have less experience to talk about. The professional profile, I think it's called, the opening paragraph. Caroline, can you tell me, do you think it's a really good idea? Do you always want to see it? Is it a must-have?
I think those in early careers feel pressure, saying, what can I put on my CV? Because I don't have much work experience. I may have one job, I may not have any jobs at all. So how can I differentiate myself? And I think there's an opportunity to say about transferable skills. And so where are the skills that you've used? And you may have had hobbies, you may have had volunteering, you may have had some part-time work. Are they transferable? Yeah, because you've been dealing with people. Time management, you've actually turned up on time every day. I know that sounds pretty basic, but trust me, 47 juniors coming in, turning up on time was an issue. These skills are still yours, so I'd keep it brief. I wouldn't go into lots of detail. And don't worry, as Neil said, if you've only got a 1-pager and you put all the information in that you need to, then it's a 1-pager.
Yeah, that's a great shout. And final thing within the kind of do's, don'ts is spelling mistakes. Can you ever get away with even just one, Neville?
It's better not to, because there's not really any excuse. I mean, spell checks and things like that have improved vastly over the last few years. So there really is no reason why a CV should include any spelling mistake. Why put your application in jeopardy? You might have all the skills, all the great experience, but if you haven't paid attention with your CV, a recruiter might just be thinking, does this person really care enough about this application, about the job that I want to offer them? But they haven't paid due care and attention in their CV.
My daughter has dyslexia, but she uses there's Quillbot, there's Grammarly, there's put it through those online systems. get somebody else to check your CV for you, and get that red pen out. We used to make a joke of it, get the red pen out and see what the spelling mistakes are. It's almost a game. Let's find the spelling mistake. Just a sense check before you send it to anybody, and once you've sense checked it, you feel confident that actually it's okay.
Yeah, don't be afraid to show people. In fact, it's recommended, get the red pen out. Any particular nuances when it came to finance CV?
Yeah, I think accountants get a bad rep, a little bit geeky. But actually the accountants I've met and worked with over the years, I've all been really different personalities and different people and with different experiences. So don't be afraid to be different. Accountancy is not just about maths. But it's like having a puzzle, accountancy, and you just got to find all the bits to go into that puzzle. So again, I'd approach it in that respect with your CV. If you're able to do that and show that with what you've done, whether that's school, university or your jobs, that's a good way of doing it.
That's a really good point about it. It's not just maths.
It's a myth, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's more about tech. So if you've got any tech at all in terms of systems, processes, that's absolutely wanted in any aspect of accountancy today, because it's about data analysis, data manipulation, Excel, or even other systems like Python or any of that sort of stuff that you might come across. They're all really, really good things to put down on your CV.
There we have it. I hope you found this informative, and keep an eye out for the next pod featuring Caroline and Neville, where they'll talk about the importance of having a well-managed LinkedIn profile, the relevance of cover letters, and address how to approach disabilities in CVs and LinkedIn profiles.
This podcast was brought to you by ACCA. Find out how we think ahead at accaglobal.com.